The village stood between dry hills and a restless river, a place where people's hearts were hardened by dust, sun, and suspicion. In that village lived a girl who seemed to carry both light and silence within her. She was young, barely entering womanhood, with a beauty that did not flaunt itself but shone in the softness of her gaze, in the gentleness of her steps, and in the quiet patience with which she moved through her days. Her voice was rarely heard above the laughter of others, yet those who did hear her found a melody in it, something untainted, something unclaimed by bitterness. It was this purity that first drew eyes, but envy has a way of clinging to innocence like shadows to a flame. From the time she was little, the girl was set apart. She was not born into wealth, and her family carried no power, but even then, the way she carried herself made others notice. She would help at the river, carrying water when others grumbled, tending to elders when others turned away. There was no drama in her kindness, no effort to win favor, and perhaps that was what unsettled the villagers most. They were used to people clawing for approval, striving for recognition, but she simply existed with a grace that did not demand. And because she did not demand, they resented her all the more. Whispers followed her as she walked to fetch wood, as she sat beneath the acacia tree, as she lingered near the markets. Some said she thought herself better than them, hiding behind that quiet dignity. Others said she was cursed, that such beauty wrapped in such silence could only mean a secret power waiting to strike. It did not matter that she had never raised her hand nor her voice against anyone. In villages where fear mixes with envy, a person's goodness becomes their most dangerous crime. Her family, instead of protecting her, often turned cold. Her stepmother in particular, sharp-eyed and bitter-tongued, watched her with unease. This woman, who had once been flattered in her youth for her own beauty, now could not bear to see the younger girl outshine her without even trying. Each day, the stepmother's words grew sharper, her corrections harsher, until the girl learned to bow her head lower and lower, swallowing her pain in silence. Yet still, she carried herself with that same quiet strength, and still, the shadows of envy lengthened around her. There were young men in the village who looked at her differently, who saw her as a jewel untarnished. Some spoke of marrying her, of lifting her from her family's cruelty. But every mention of her name carried both admiration and venom. For every boy who admired her, there were mothers whispering warnings, rivals twisting stories, and elders shaking their heads as though her existence alone would bring ruin. When people cannot find fault, they create it, and soon the girl was accused of pride, of witchcraft, of luring hearts with silent snares. Even the children mirrored their parents, mocking her as she passed. They imitated a staggering walk, pretending to drink poison and collapse, muttering that one day she would be the cause of death. These games of cruelty bled into her daily life until she could hardly step outside without feeling 100 eyes piercing her back. She grew used to keeping her gaze lowered, her steps careful, and her heart locked deep within, but the more she shrank from the world, the more the world pressed in to crush her. Yet the girl was not without spirit. Alone at the river's edge, she would let her eyes rest on the flowing water and whisper prayers too soft for anyone to hear. She dreamed of a place where kindness was not mocked, where tears were not scorned, where a heart could be gentle without being torn apart. In those moments, there was a fire beneath her quiet exterior, a resilience that the villagers mistook for weakness. For though she was fragile in their eyes, the truth was that she carried within her the strength of silence, the endurance of one who had borne cruelty without surrendering to it. But envy does not sleep, and whispers do not vanish on their own. They thickened, night after night, gathering in corners of the village, trading tales until suspicion became belief. And belief, once rooted, demanded action. Her stepmother's jealousy, the villagers' fear, the rivals' bitterness, all converged, forming a shadow that crept steadily closer, waiting for the moment to fall upon her. She felt it even before she knew it. In the way the laughter stopped when she entered, in the way people turned their backs when she passed, in the way her stepmother's smile never reached her eyes. She was a girl who had done no harm, but in that village, innocence had no defense against malice. She was a girl with kindness in her hands and prayers on her lips, but already the weight of envy was circling her like vultures waiting for the dying. And though she could not yet see the shape of her fate, the shadows had chosen her. Her stepmother's hatred did not begin as fire. It began as an ember, a small, smoldering thing that grew each time the girl's presence reminded her of her own fading youth and dimming influence. At first, it was little cruelties, denying her food when the others ate, sending her to fetch water in the hottest sun, piling upon her the chores no one else wanted. But envy is never satisfied with small victories. Each day the girl remained graceful despite the weight placed upon her. The ember grew hotter, until it burned within the stepmother like a curse she could not shake. Relatives who once pitied the girl were drawn into the stepmother's orbit. With sly words, she twisted their sympathies into suspicion. "Have you not noticed," she would whisper, "how the men's eyes follow her? Do you not see how she pretends to be humble while waiting for a chance to take what belongs to others?" Aunts and cousins, hungry for gossip, listened eagerly. And in a place where rumors could outweigh truth, the girl soon found herself painted as cunning, dangerous, even unholy. The stepmother, however, wanted more than whispers. She wanted the girl erased, not only from the house but from memory, from the hearts of those who might see her as good. Killing her body would be simple, but the stepmother feared that even in death, the girl's innocence might be remembered, that her name might one day be spoken with reverence. What she wanted was to crush the girl's spirit, to drown her in shame, to ensure no one could recall her without also recalling the stain of accusation. The plotting began quietly. Late at night, when the moonlight painted long shadows across the clay floor, the stepmother sat with a few trusted relatives, speaking in hushed tones. They discussed the girl as though she were a sickness in the house. "She is a burden," one muttered. "Her tears weaken the family's name," another added. The stepmother leaned closer, her eyes glinting. "Burden and weakness can be cured, with poison." The word lingered in the air, heavy and final. But this was no ordinary poison she sought. It was said that some roots, when mixed with river water and left beneath the moon, could silence not just the body but the soul, leaving no chance for words of defense or cries of innocence. The stepmother believed such a death would erase the girl's gentle strength forever. No songs would be sung for her, no memory would linger to soften hearts. She would vanish as though she had never been, a silent sacrifice to envy. The relatives hesitated at first, unease flickering in their eyes. Killing was one thing, cursing the soul was another. Yet fear of the stepmother's sharp tongue, and fear of the girl's quiet endurance, drove them to compliance. For in their twisted minds, her silence itself became proof of guilt. If she did not fight back, did she not secretly believe the accusations? If she did not protest, did it not mean she carried shame? Their logic was poison long before the cup was mixed. And so, plans were set. The stepmother would wait for a day when the girl seemed weakest, when her head bowed low, when the villagers had grown restless with suspicion. Then she would offer her a drink, perhaps under the guise of kindness, perhaps in the name of family. One sip and the girl's breath would falter, her body collapse. The villagers, already convinced of her curse, would not mourn her, they would bury her quickly and without song. The stepmother's triumph would be complete. Not only would the girl's life be extinguished, but her spirit would be smothered under layers of lies. Yet even as they plotted, the girl's shadow stretched across their thoughts. Her eyes, quiet but piercing, haunted them when they tried to sleep. Her kindness, unshaken even under cruelty, lingered like a thorn in their conscience. The stepmother pushed these doubts away, silencing them with her own voice. "Better her gone than our names destroyed." But beneath her certainty was fear. Fear that the very silence she despised carried a strength she could not understand. And so the hatred brewed, thick as storm clouds on the horizon. What had begun as envy had turned into a mission, not only to kill a girl but to erase the light she carried. The poison was not yet mixed, but in their hearts the relatives had already tasted it. The day arrived with a cruel sort of ceremony, as though fate itself had been dressed in malice. The stepmother prepared the drink in secret, her hands steady though her heart raced with a mixture of triumph and dread. The vessel was no ordinary cup, but an earthen one painted with cracks and dark stains from years of use, chosen deliberately so that no beauty or comfort could soften the act. Into it she poured water drawn from the deepest part of the well, and to this she added the crushed root and bitter herbs said to silence both body and spirit. As she stirred, the surface shimmered faintly in the dim light, the liquid appearing darker than water should ever be, as though it had swallowed shadows. When she emerged, the house seemed to hold its breath. Relatives gathered, pretending to busy themselves with tasks but lingering close, waiting to see the girl undone. Children who had once mocked her tears now watched with wide, curious eyes, sensing the tension but not understanding its depth. The air was thick with anticipation, every movement deliberate, every glance sharpened by expectation. It was not a trial nor a defense, it was an execution masked as duty. The stepmother called her softly, with a voice that dripped false sweetness. The girl came, hesitant yet obedient, her hands clasped before her as if to shield herself from whatever awaited. She did not expect kindness, experience had taught her not to. But she did not resist either. She stood silently while the cup was pressed into her hands, the bitter smell rising to her nose, making her stomach twist before she even raised it to her lips. The relatives leaned closer, some smirking, some whispering. Their eyes glimmered with the cruel satisfaction of those who believe they are watching justice take its course. "Drink," the stepmother said, the word soft but commanding, laced with the authority of someone who had already decided the girl's fate. The girl lifted the cup, her hands trembling slightly. For a brief moment, her reflection shimmered on the liquid surface, fragile, sorrowful, yet strangely calm. She hesitated. Perhaps in that pause she hoped someone would stop her, that someone would see the wrongness of it all. But no hand reached out, no voice rose in protest. Instead, mocking laughter rippled around her. "She fears even water," one muttered. "Weakness to the last breath," another added. And so, under their watchful, hungry eyes, she tilted the cup and drank. The liquid burned as it touched her tongue, bitterness coating her mouth, searing down her throat like fire disguised as water. Her body convulsed slightly, her chest tightening with each swallow. Still she did not cry out. Not a single word, not a plea. Only the faint quiver of her lips betrayed the storm raging within. The room grew silent except for the sound of her breathing, ragged, uneven, until at last the cup was empty. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The villagers shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether the poison would do its work. Then her knees buckled and she fell to the floor, the vessel slipping from her grasp and shattering against the ground. Gasps erupted, followed quickly by cruel chuckles. "So quick," one said with a twisted smile. The cursed one finally silenced. The stepmother stood above her, lips pressed into a thin line, her satisfaction thinly veiling the flicker of unease in her eyes. The girl lay still, her chest rising faintly, her lashes trembling as though she hovered between two worlds. Around her, the crowd of relatives and neighbors leaned closer, their shadows falling over her fragile form. To them this was not murder, it was cleansing. They had forced her to drink, not with blades or ropes, but with the weight of their collective scorn. And in their eyes that made it justifiable. But the silence that followed her collapse was heavy, too heavy. It was not the silence of peace, nor of justice fulfilled. It was the silence of something unnatural, as though the poison they celebrated had not simply entered her body, but had awakened something else entirely. The poison burned through her veins like liquid fire, a cruel heat spreading from her stomach to every fragile corner of her body. She felt her throat tighten as if invisible hands were closing around it, her chest heaving with each desperate gasp for air. Her vision blurred, the faces of the villagers twisting into grotesque shapes, their sneers stretching longer, their laughter sounding like hollow echoes bouncing off her ribs. She clutched at her stomach as waves of sharp pain tore through her, her knees buckling beneath the weight of the venom that sought to undo her life. Every breath became a battle, every heartbeat a drumbeat of agony that rattled her bones and throbbed in her ears like a death chant. The crowd leaned forward, eager, hungry for her end. Her stepmother's eyes glinted with triumph, her lips curled into the kind of smile that fed on suffering. A few villagers whispered, already predicting how soon her body would fall limp, how soon the dirt would swallow her whole. To them it was entertainment, a cruel theater staged in the heart of the village. The girl's sobs, the trembling of her hands, the sweat gathering on her brow were proof that she was weaker, that she was undeserving of kindness. Their hearts had grown hard, and in their hardness, they found joy in her breaking. But as her body convulsed, something peculiar stirred within her. Instead of shutting down, her body resisted in ways unseen before. The poison spread like a black river inside her, yet it did not flow smoothly. It clashed with something ancient, something quiet but powerful that lay hidden in her blood. Each wave of pain did not only consume, it collided against a force she herself had never known existed. Her screams faltered, caught between agony and confusion, as the burning shifted into a strange vibration, a pulse that did not feel like her own. The villagers noticed her collapse, her body folding onto the ground, but instead of the lifeless stillness they anticipated, she writhed, trembling as though the earth itself was moving through her. Her eyes, half closed and glistening with tears, caught the fire of the torches, and for a fleeting moment they seemed to glow, not with death but with defiance. Her breathing was ragged, but her chest did not still. It rose and fell with a strange rhythm, each inhale dragging the venom deeper, each exhale pushing something invisible back into the world. Her throat felt scorched, her tongue heavy, but deep inside, beneath the storm of torment, there was an unsettling calm rising. It was as though the poison was being weighed, measured, tested, not by her but by something beyond her control. Her spirit trembled on the edge of leaving her body, yet it clung to the threads of life, not in desperation, but as if waiting for something. Her skin grew clammy, her limbs cold, and yet her heart pounded with a fierceness that refused to fade. She could almost hear it, her heart calling out against the venom, each beat a protest that echoed in her skull. The villagers' laughter grew louder as they saw her struggle, mistaking resistance for prolonging pain. They leaned in, eager to hear the final gasp, the stillness that would confirm their victory. But the girl's body refused them that satisfaction. She bent and twisted in the dirt, her face pressed against the earth, her fingernails digging into the soil as if clawing her way into the ground's memory. Her tears soaked the dust beneath her, but even her tears seemed different, thicker, heavier, clinging to her skin as though reluctant to fall. Moments passed, each second stretching into eternity, and still she did not die. Her breaths rasped like torn cloth, her body quaked under the strain, but the poison seemed confused inside her, moving slower, unsure. The villagers exchanged glances. Some muttered curses, frustrated at the delay. Others laughed cruelly, mocking her endurance as though it made her more foolish, more pathetic. Only a handful, those with sharper eyes, noticed the way her skin flushed and then paled in strange waves, or how her body did not wither as swiftly as others who had suffered poison before. In her haze of pain, she became dimly aware of this strange war inside her body. The venom twisted through her like a serpent, yet something coiled tighter around it, restraining its fangs. She did not understand it, but she felt it, like a shadow that was not her own rising to meet the toxin. The sensation terrified her as much as it comforted her, for it was unknown, uncontrollable, yet undeniably present. Her body was aflame, her soul trembling on the brink of departure, but something was holding her tethered, forcing the poison to linger, to hesitate. The crowd's noise became a blur. Their laughter, their jeers, their whispers dissolved into a distant hum, like voices carried by wind from another world. What filled her ears instead was the relentless beat of her heart, louder, harder, more commanding than ever before. Each pulse felt like a strike, like a drum heralding a storm. She could not move, could barely breathe, but in that storm of fire and pain, she realized she was still alive, alive against the expectation of all who surrounded her. And though her body was drenched in sweat, her lips dry and cracked, she felt an eerie certainty settling in her bones. The poison was not simply hers to carry. It was waiting, watching, searching. The night fell heavy upon the village, wrapping the earth in a stillness that felt unnatural. The festival fire had died down to smoldering embers, their faint glow casting jagged shadows across the beaten ground where the girl's body lay. She was motionless, her limbs slack, her skin pale beneath the faint light of the moon. From a distance, she looked lifeless, a discarded figure swallowed by silence. The villagers, satisfied with their cruelty, had drifted away one by one, their laughter echoing faintly through the night until even that faded. Only the dark remained, and the hushed chorus of crickets that dared to sing. Her stepmother lingered for a while, her gaze fixed on the still form with a cruel satisfaction, until even she turned away, whispering, "It is done." To all who saw, the girl was gone. The poison had done its work, the struggle had ended. No one thought to question further. No one stayed to witness the truth of what was unfolding. Beneath the cloak of silence, something stirred. The shadows stretched strangely, not obeying the firelight or the moonlight, as though they moved of their own will. The earth around her seemed to hum faintly, a vibration so subtle it could be mistaken for the rustling of the wind. But there was no wind. The air was too still, too thick, as if holding its breath. The girl's body, pale and fragile, seemed wrapped in an unseen current. Her chest did not rise, her lips did not part, and yet the ground beneath her trembled as though uneasy with what it held. The poison within her had not rested. It did not seep gently into silence as it should have. Instead, it shifted, restless, coiling through her veins like a snake that had not found its den. It seemed to pulse faintly, invisible but present, echoing against the walls of her still body. The villagers had believed they had silenced her spirit, but the poison had not claimed her soul in the way they expected. It fidgeted inside her, as though dissatisfied, as though searching for something beyond her flesh. The shadows lengthened, gathering near her as if drawn by that restless current. They curled around her hands, her face, her bare feet, like strands of smoke seeping from the soil itself. From time to time, her fingers twitched, so slight it could be dismissed as the settling of death, but it was not the stillness of one fully gone. It was a silence too deliberate, like the pause before a scream. Above, the moon broke through a passing veil of clouds, its silver light spilling over her face. In that moment, her closed eyes fluttered, not opening, but quivering as though something beneath the lids strained against them. Her lips, dry and cracked, parted just slightly though no breath escaped. What moved was not life as the villagers knew it, but something unsettled. The poison had not accepted its task, had not anchored itself into her death. It lingered, alive in its own way, like a guest reluctant to leave, like a predator waiting for the right prey. Around her, the air thickened further, heavy with the feeling of being watched. The trees, tall and silent at the edge of the village, seemed to lean closer, their branches unmoving yet somehow attentive. Even the insects grew quiet, their song fading as if sensing what human eyes could not. The world bent toward her, aware of the strange disquiet that swirled where she lay. Hours stretched thin. The fire's last ember winked out, leaving only the moon to guard the scene. Yet even in death-like stillness, her presence did not vanish. Some would have sworn they saw faint ripples moving in the dirt around her body, as if water had seeped from her tear-stained face into the ground. Some would have claimed the shadows flickered strangely when no flame remained. But there were no eyes to witness it now, only the quiet expanse of the night and the restless hum of the unseen. And in that silence, a truth began to form, unspoken, unnoticed. The poison had not chosen her. It lingered, searching, hungering, waiting in the shadows that grew thicker, darker, more alive. The girl's body was still, but the night was not. Something had begun that no one could undo. The morning dawned gray and uneasy, though no storm clouds hung in the sky. A strange heaviness lingered in the village air, as though the night had carried secrets that the day could not wash away. At first, the people went about their routines, fetching water, tending fires and readying their animals, but there was a ripple beneath the surface, an unsettled feeling they could not name. It was only when a scream rose from one of the huts that the unease took shape. The hut belonged to the man who had laughed loudest the night before, the one who had clapped his hands when the cup of poison was forced upon the girl. He had mocked her most mercilessly, calling her tears a river wasted, and urging the others to drink to her death. Now that same man writhed upon his mat, drenched in sweat, his body twisted with pain. His wife and children crouched beside him, their eyes wide with terror as he gasped for breath. His skin had taken on a strange pallor, almost gray, and along his arms and neck, faint black lines spread like cracks in stone. His veins seemed to darken, pulsing unnaturally beneath the skin, as though the very blood inside him had soured. Every breath rattled through his chest, shallow and labored, and at times his eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. His mouth frothed, his voice breaking into incoherent cries that made even the elders turn pale. By midday the whole village knew. People gathered outside the hut, whispering furiously, but none dared go inside. Mothers pulled their children close, muttering prayers under their breath. Men who had jeered at the girl only hours ago now avoided each other's eyes, the memory of their cruelty fresh in their minds. The women traded uneasy glances, remembering the way the poison had been forced upon her, how they had laughed at her trembling hands. The sound of the man's cries seemed to echo louder than any festival drum, each wail a reminder of something unnatural that had begun. Poison, someone whispered, their voice trembling. But how? He did not drink. Others murmured in agreement, but the silence that followed was heavier than denial. For though none would say it outright, every mind circled back to the same thought, the girl. The girl who had been left in the dirt, her body still and lifeless. The girl whose tears had shimmered strangely for as long as they could remember. Could it be that the poison had refused her? Could it have chosen another? By evening the man's body was failing. His limbs shook violently, his skin clammy and pale. The black veins spread deeper across his chest, a visible map of corruption that horrified all who saw it. He gasped for air that would not come, his voice reduced to a rasp. His family wept beside him, begging the gods for mercy, but no prayer seemed to touch him. When he finally went silent, it was not the peaceful stillness of natural death. His face was twisted in terror, his eyes wide as if he had seen something dreadful in his final moment. The villagers stepped back, afraid even to touch him. No burial rites were begun that night. Instead, they stood in uneasy silence, the whispers threading through the crowd like smoke. "The poison moves," an elder finally muttered, his voice hoarse. "It is not finished." And in the shadows that gathered at the edge of the village, it felt as though unseen eyes were listening, waiting. The night no longer belonged to them, it belonged to something else. The first man's death should have been enough to silence laughter forever, but in the village of envy and cruelty, fear did not stop tongues from whispering. They whispered through the night, huddled in huts lit with trembling flames, each voice heavy with dread. None dared speak of her name aloud, yet every thought circled back to her. the girl who had swallowed the poison but had not died. Something darker had begun, and the village could no longer ignore it. The second night came swiftly, carried by winds that howled unnaturally through the trees. Another scream pierced the air, this time from the home of a woman known for her sharp tongue. She had been the one to push the cup to the girl's lips, sneering as she urged her to drink faster. Now she clawed at her throat, her breath ragged, her face twisting into something unrecognizable. Her skin blistered as if fire licked beneath it, though no flame touched her. Her family tried to hold her down, but she thrashed violently, her fingernails breaking against the ground as black veins spread across her chest. Her eyes rolled back, and within moments she collapsed, her body limp, her lips stained dark as if the poison had finally found its way to her. Panic spread like wildfire. The villagers began to connect the deaths, though few dared say it. The poison had not killed the girl, it was moving, hunting, choosing its true prey. By dawn, a third victim fell, one of the elders who had ordered the ritual. His cries echoed longer than the rest. His spine bent backward at impossible angles, and his breath turned to a sickly hiss as blood seeped from his nose and ears. He had laughed the loudest, mocking the girl's tears, and now his body was broken, abandoned by the very life he had thought untouchable. Whispers turned into full-blown terror. Families barred their doors, children were hushed, and no one dared to look too long at their neighbors. The village, once proud in its cruelty, was unraveling into chaos. Yet the deaths did not stop. On the fourth night, two brothers who had thrown stones at her door when she was alive both fell ill within hours of each other. Their skin turned cold, their lips blue, and when they opened their mouths to cry out, only dark fluid spilled forth. Their mother wailed as their bodies grew stiff in her arms, but no one dared approach to help her. By the fifth day the survivors whispered that death was no longer random, it was deliberate. It was as though the poison carried memory, as though it remembered every laugh, every sneer, every cruel hand that had pushed the innocent girl toward her doom. It was not killing blindly, it was punishing. The stepmother, who had started it all, could feel its breath on her neck though it had not yet touched her. She tried to rally the villagers, insisting that this was witchcraft, that the girl had cursed them before her death. But her words trembled, her voice unsteady, and none believed her strength anymore. Fear had hollowed the villagers. They avoided her, whispering that it was only a matter of time before the poison reached her veins. Death came in waves, each victim more gruesome than the last. A young man who had jeered and danced while she drank, awoke one morning with black streaks crawling across his chest like vines. His screams filled the air until his body went rigid, his limbs twisted unnaturally. Another woman who had spat on the girl's feet, collapsed while grinding grain, her hands trembling as her eyes bulged in terror. By the time her family rushed to her, she was already gone, her face frozen in a silent scream. The village became a place of mourning, but mourning without repentance, for no one dared to admit aloud what they all knew. The poison had chosen its path, and its vengeance was not finished. They could lock their doors, they could pray to their gods, they could burn herbs and chant against curses, but none of it mattered. The poison remembered. Every night, the villagers waited in dread for the next cry, the next body, the next twisted fate. It was as though the poison itself had become alive, moving silently from house to house, passing over the innocent and sinking its teeth into the guilty. No one could see it, no one could fight it. All they could do was listen to the screams and pray they would not be next. And always, beneath the wails of the dying, the villagers swore they could hear a softer sound, a girl's quiet weeping, drifting through the night like the echo of a curse fulfilled. Her body had lain still for days, a hushed body that the villagers assumed was empty of spirit. They had not dared to bury her, not after the strange deaths began. Instead, they left her in the old hut, shrouded in silence, as though afraid to touch her for fear of what might stir. At night, when the winds screamed and the guilty died one after another, the villagers whispered that she was no longer of this world. Some called her a cursed vessel, others claimed her shadow walked even if her body did not. But on the seventh night something shifted. The hut that held her seemed to breathe. The air inside grew heavy, damp with a strange warmth, and the floorboards creaked as though something beneath was rising. Then her chest, long unmoving, heaved suddenly, violently, as if she had been drowned and was now breaking the surface of deep water. A rattling gasp tore from her throat. Her eyes snapped open. They were no longer the eyes of a simple village girl. Where once they had been soft and weary from tears, now they glowed faintly, a pale light flickering deep within them, like embers trapped in a dark well. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came, only a faint hiss as if the poison itself still lingered in her breath. Her hands shook as she pushed herself upright. The weakness in her limbs was real, her body frail, but there was also a strange strength beneath it, one that was not entirely her own. She looked down at her skin and saw faint lines, dark vein-like trails that shimmered faintly under her flesh. They pulsed softly, glowing and fading like fireflies caught beneath her skin. She touched one with trembling fingers, and the moment she did, the hut around her seemed to shudder. Outside a dog howled. Then another. Villagers stirred from uneasy dreams, some swearing they felt the ground shift beneath their mats. Mothers clutched children closer, whispering prayers, for they knew something unnatural was stirring. Inside the hut, she struggled to her feet. Each movement felt as though she were dragging herself out of deep waters, yet every step grew firmer than the last. She reached the doorway, her fingers gripping the wood for balance, and looked out at the village. The night was eerily quiet. No laughter, no chatter, only the distant wails of those who had already lost someone to the poison's vengeance. When a torch flickered nearby, its flame bent toward her as though drawn by an unseen pull. A villager who had dared to linger outside froze at the sight of her. His eyes widened, his knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, mumbling prayers. "She walks," he gasped, his voice trembling. "She walks again." The cry spread through the village like fire on dry grass. Doors cracked open, fearful eyes peeked out, and soon dozens had gathered, staring in horrified awe. There she stood, alive yet changed. The poison had not claimed her body, it had marked her. She was pale, her steps unsteady, but her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and her presence made the air itself feel heavy. Some whispered that the poison had spared her because she was innocent. Others whispered darker things, that the poison had chosen her as its vessel, carrying its vengeance through her veins. Whatever the truth, none could meet her gaze without shuddering, for her eyes seemed to see too much. She did not speak. She only looked at them, one by one, her gaze lingering longest on the ones who had forced the cup to her lips. And though she said nothing, they felt as if she had spoken, felt as though her silence carried the weight of every secret, every cruelty, every hidden sin. The villagers could not tell if she was alive or something reborn, but they all knew one thing: she was no longer the same girl. She had returned carrying something that did not belong to this world, and the poison that should have ended her had instead given her a terrible kind of power. And as the night deepened, the earth itself seemed to lean closer, waiting to see what she would do. The village had never known such unrest. It began with whispers, carried from one hut to another, muttered by trembling lips in the hush of night. No healer's herbs could soothe the twisting veins of those who had laughed loudest at the girl's suffering. No chants of the elders, no bitter brews, no charms hung at doorposts could halt the spreading sickness. The guilty had been marked, and nothing mortal hands attempted could change their fate. The poison had become something alive, moving unseen from body to body like a shadow creeping across walls. Those who had forced the cup into her hands began to clutch at their own throats, gasping for air as black lines crawled up their necks. Those who had mocked her with jeering words found their laughter rotting in their throats, replaced by choking coughs and blood. Even those who had only stood by silently, too cowardly to help yet too cruel to stop, felt a fever creep into their bones that no healer could explain. The huts filled with the sound of groans and screams. Mothers wailed over sons, wives clutched husbands whose eyes had turned hollow and glassy. The poison spared no dignity, it reduced the once proud villagers into crawling figures writhing on the ground. And in the midst of it all, the girl walked, slow, quiet, fragile yet unbroken. She did not speak, she did not strike, she only moved through the narrow paths of the village like a spirit risen from the grave. Children hid behind their mothers when she passed, clutching their skirts tightly. Men who had once laughed boldly at her tears now turned their eyes away, too ashamed to face her. Her steps made the air heavy, and wherever she went, silence followed. Even the insects seemed to stop their night songs, as though they too feared her presence. She was not the cause of the sickness, yet her survival, her strange glow, and her silence made her a walking reminder of what had been set into motion. The innocent trembled, not because they had mocked her, but because they did not know what would come next. Could the poison distinguish between guilt and innocence? Could it tell the difference between a child who laughed at his elders' jokes and a man who had forced the poison into her lips? Fear gripped everyone alike. People shut their doors, barred their windows, and clutched charms against evil, though deep down they knew this was not an evil spirit, it was justice. The stepmother who had orchestrated the cruelty suffered most. Her body wasted quickly, her eyes sunken, her voice reduced to a rasp. She had once carried herself with pride, mocking the girl at every chance, twisting every kindness into shame. Now she clutched at her chest as if to claw the poison out with her own nails, crawling to the feet of the villagers she had once ruled with her tongue. But none dared help her. Even those who had once feared her venomous words now stood apart, muttering that she had earned what came to her. At night, the cries echoed through the village like a chorus of the damned. The sick moaned and pleaded for help, but none could be given. The healers sat in despair, their herbs useless, their chants powerless. They whispered to one another that the poison was no longer in the girl's body, it was walking freely, choosing its hosts, marking those whose hearts carried cruelty. And still, she moved through the village like a shadow of judgment. She did not heal, she did not harm, she only bore witness. Her glowing eyes met those of the dying, and in their final breaths they swore they saw their own sins reflected back at them. Some begged her for forgiveness, clawing at the earth, but she remained silent. The poison had chosen its course, and she was not the one to alter it. The innocent prayed fervently. Mothers who had never mocked her held their children close and whispered, "We are safe. We must be safe." Yet even in their prayers they felt unease, for the sight of her walking among them, alive when so many stronger bodies fell, unsettled their hearts. The once proud village was reduced to a place of fear. The market lay abandoned. Fires burned low in their pits. No laughter, no song, no chatter filled the air. Only silence, broken by the coughs of the dying and the soft shuffle of her footsteps. By dawn, the people understood what they could not admit the night before. The village itself was doomed. No healer would come, for word had spread to neighboring settlements that the place was cursed. No one would send aid. The villagers were left to face what they had summoned with their cruelty. And in the heart of it all, the girl walked, her glowing eyes a living reminder that justice had already chosen its path. Her story did not end with the last death rattle in the village. Long after the soil had been washed clean of footprints and the poisoned bodies were buried beneath hurried mounds of earth, the memory of her lingered like a shadow no one could ignore. People spoke of her in low voices, never daring to raise the subject under the open sky, as if the very air might carry their words back to her. They said she had swallowed death and returned, but not as the same fragile girl who once cried beneath the cruelty of her kin. Something older, heavier, and stranger clung to her presence, and no one who had looked into her glowing eyes ever forgot them. The tale grew with each telling. At first, it was whispered among the neighboring villages, a girl forced to drink poison who survived while her tormentors withered and rotted from the inside out. Some dismissed it as superstition, another tale born of fear and misfortune, but others swore by its truth. Travelers who passed by the ruins of her village often reported silence too deep for comfort, a hush that seemed to press against their ears, as if the land itself refused laughter. They claimed that if you stayed too long, your own voice would catch in your throat, your words turning sour, your tongue heavy as though the poison still lingered in the soil. Over the years, parents began to weave her story into warnings for their children. "Do not mock the grieving," they said, "for cruelty feeds its own poison." Mothers told daughters that jealousy corrodes the heart before any drink could. Fathers warned sons that a sharpened tongue might cut deeper than any blade, and that such wounds were never hidden from the eyes of the spirits. Slowly, her tale became less about the girl herself and more about the unseen justice she embodied. She had not been saved to live forever among them. She had been spared to leave behind a mark so deep that generations would shudder at the thought of cruelty turning back upon itself. Those who believed most strongly in her legend claimed that the poison had not merely killed the wicked but chosen them. It had listened to laughter, counted the sneers, and marked each soul that had taken delight in another's pain. When the cup was pressed to her lips, the poison had tasted her spirit and recoiled, sparing her flesh but embedding its fire within her veins as a warning. The glow in her eyes was proof, they said, that she carried the memory of what had passed, not as a victim, but as a vessel through which the poison had written its justice. As the decades passed, people avoided settling on the land where the doomed village once stood. The ruins slowly crumbled, swallowed by creeping vines and grass that grew too thick and too fast, as if nourished by the blood of the guilty. Children were told never to fetch water near that ground, for it was said that any vessel dipped there would sour, no matter how pure the stream appeared. At night, travelers claimed to hear faint coughs and choking gasps carried on the wind, the last echoes of villagers whose laughter had curdled into death. And still the girl's story stretched beyond that place. In towns far from the site, storytellers kept her memory alive by shaping it into parables. Some painted her as a figure of divine justice, chosen by unseen forces to remind humans of the price of cruelty. Others spoke of her as a spirit half living, half poison, wandering between villages unseen, searching for those who mocked the weak. Every version carried the same lesson. Poison does not always belong to the cup, it belongs to the soul that feeds it. Thus, she endured not as a name, for her name was forgotten, but as a symbol. The poison girl, the spared one, the vessel of silent justice. Children grew up with her shadow hanging over them, careful with their words, mindful of their laughter. And when someone was cruel, too sharp or too unkind, there were always murmurs, "Careful, remember the girl who drank poison. It may choose you instead." In the end, she became more than a victim of envy or a survivor of death. She became a mirror in which people saw themselves, a reminder that the venom one pours into another's life may one day return to their own. And though her body had once burned and collapsed, her spirit lived on, not as a ghost, but as a warning etched into the very marrow of human fear. The poison girl was no longer just a story, she was the silence that followed cruel laughter, the chill in the air when someone mocked another's pain, the memory that cruelty never goes unanswered. Her legend endured, not because she survived, but because the poison had chosen truth over death, soul over body, and that choice could never be forgotten.